Morning. See that we've got a lot of folks got their microphones on mute and stuff, which is good. So we're going to get started here. Thank you first for signing up for the webinar. My name is Kevin Flood. I'm a technical specialist for First Line Technology. I'm also a trainer. I've been with First Line for about 3 years. In another life, not too long ago, I am a retired DEA special agent. I did 26 years with DEA, spent 12 years in Phoenix, 4 years in Europe, 7 years in Michigan, and then my last 4.5 years down in Tucson. So kind of my area of expertise, fortunately or unfortunately, was synthetic drug lab investigations. Did a lot of, back in the day in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of meth lab investigations in Arizona, and did ecstasy and investigations with the Dutch police in Europe. And then down in Tucson, it was pretty much every type of drug that was out there, and especially fentanyl. So that's my background. So what we're going to talk about today is something that I completely support, but I think that it could be done better, and that's press conferences. Again, I'm not a PIO. I hope there's some PIOs on here that can give us some insight about how to actually do press conferences and stuff. But if you every day on the news, there's always something, whether it's a state or local agency or a federal agency that does a press conference, and they're showing the general public the drugs that have been seized. Most of it now is fentanyl. And so I think it's a very important thing that they need to do, but I also think that given the toxicity of fentanyl and some of the risks that are involved with that there's some precautions that need to be taken, before, during, and after, to make sure that we're not rendering something safe when it's not. Okay. So first thing here, First Line Technology, we've been around for just a little over 20 years. We're headquartered out of Fredericksburg, Virginia. We kind of have 4 different sections. I focus mostly on the decon tech, and that is basically chemical biological threats, which includes most of your drugs out there, because most of your drugs are chemicals, so they're either synthetic or semi-synthetic. But we primarily look at products. We produce and manufacture and sell decon products, again, for chemical biological threats and also dangerous drugs. So that's one part. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. We have our ambubus section, which is basically a mass casualty transport conversion of vans, buses, and things like that. We have our phase core. This is a cooling system that we have. And then we have our training, which is our First Line Utilization Academy, which is kind of what this is today. So that's kind of our company. Again, been around 20 years, and our major customers obviously are the military, the fire service, and law enforcement and first responders. So I'm going to skip this. We got a lot of people on here. I'm hoping that a lot of you, or I can see you have people that are in the military and probably law enforcement and stuff. And again, if we have any public information officers out there for agencies, please raise your hand. And if you have any input, I want to make this very low key. If you have any questions as we go along, insights, some stories and stuff that you want to tell us about, please go ahead and do so. Again, very low key. If you need to take a break, we'll take a break. I'm really low maintenance. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm for doing press conferences, but I think that I'm speaking from experience. When we do these press conferences, everybody wants to get the word out. You seize 1,000 kilograms of cocaine, which unfortunately, I was part of several investigations like that, and we didn't do it right. I can tell you that. Knowing what I know now, and going back when we were doing stuff like that, we didn't do it right. And knowing what I know now and knowing some of the dangers and some of the lasting health effects and stuff on people, we should be doing it differently. And so that's kind of what I'm focusing on right now. So, everybody knows right now fentanyl is a problem. Fentanyl is a threat, but it's a manageable threat if we understand it. Okay. A lot of us were dealing with fentanyl before it became a big issue, and we handled it like we would handle anything else, which was kind of ignorance on our part, but that's just the way it was. So now we have a better understanding of what's going on, and so we know how to deal with it. And again, this presentation today is not designed, and I don't want to insult anybody's knowledge or intelligence. I kind of have a baseline that you have a wide range of people that are here today that are listening and watching, and so just kind of cover the basics. Again, it's not an attempt. You may be hearing stuff that you already know, but the reality of it is we kind of have to start someplace, because I have to assume that not everybody knows as much as somebody else. Okay. So the major question that I have whenever I see these press conferences is like, if fentanyl is so dangerous, then why do we have it on display? Why do we have it in a conference room sitting on a table? Why do we let reporters go up, touch it, photograph it, and stuff like that? That's the question. Because when I see that now, I sit there and go, okay, so were they wearing gloves? Were they wearing, you don't need to be in a level A hazmat suit to deal with fentanyl, especially like this. But there is, I can tell you right now from experience, that on that packaging right there, whether it's double bagged in the original packaging and then it's in an evidence bag or an evidence box, there is residual contamination and cross-contamination on the outside of all those packaging that's now being spread all over wherever this conference is taking place. That's just reality. And if somebody were to go in with a trace detection device like an MX908 and run swabs across that table, they would probably be surprised. And I'm not trying to scare anybody about this, but the reality of it is, this is what's happening. Okay. So that's the question to kind of ponder, especially if you're a PIO or a manager or supervisor or somebody who's in control of these things, is what am I doing to protect my people? What am I doing to protect the general public? Because the last thing we want to do is for somebody to get an exposure and end up having to go to the emergency department of a hospital. Okay. So the objective today really is two things. It's to talk about the necessity of it, and it is a necessity, but also talk about the risk and how to mitigate or eliminate those risks. Okay. And the picture on the left right there, that's a couple guys that I worked with down in Tucson. The one on the guy on the left-hand side did the undercover on this particular case, and that's probably a couple 100 pounds of methamphetamine there. This guy, Raul, was one of the best undercovers I ever worked with. The guy was absolutely incredible, but we did this all the time in Tucson. It was not unusual on a weekly basis and sometimes on a daily basis to come across this much drugs, and then it would go on display. Okay. Happens all the time everywhere. So talk about the necessity. Okay. How many times have you seen this where a boss in a police department or a law enforcement agency who has absolutely, no involvement with your case other than they're a first or second or third line supervisor, is standing before the press and they're picking up drugs and they're showing it to the press? Okay. It's important. And the reason why it's important really is because it's transparency. This is what we're doing with the taxpayers' money. This is how we're making your community safe. Okay. It just is. It's real important. It builds public trust. Okay. And the big thing is really it raises awareness about, the dangers of illicit drugs in a particular area. There's a lot of folks, and I go back to people that I know from all walks of life, when they found out what I did or what I was doing, they're like, wow, is that really in our community? And I said, there's so many things that go on in your community, whether it's a suburb of a, nice suburb in an area, or it's in a bad part of town, that if you don't know what to look for and you're not seeing it, it's there. I can take you to any strip mall in any part of, I live in the Phoenix area, any suburb of Phoenix. And if you sit there long enough, you're going to see some type of illegal activity. You just are. So really does get the word out there. So what are the risks? Okay. And this is the big one. Um, when we talk about especially fentanyl, okay, fentanyl is a big one because fentanyl has some unique characteristics to it. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But one of the things is the accidental aerosolization of fentanyl. Okay. And again, I'll talk more about that, but fentanyl can be extremely toxic, but it can be dangerous in trace amounts. Okay, so when it gets, and it's because of its chemical characteristics, it aerosolizes very easily and you don't see it. And again, when I talk about handling evidence, moving evidence around, people touching it without the proper PPEs, that's how it's going to get aerosolized. And it's going to get on clothing, it's going to get on surfaces, and it's going to be there. Okay. Uh, Cross contamination, same thing. You're taking that stuff that's contaminated, you're bringing it into a semi-sterile area, and you're contaminating it. How are you going to get it into your system? I know there's a lot of stories out there about, if you look at fentanyl, you think about fentanyl, you touch it, it's going to absorb through your skin and you're going to die or you're going to overdose. Okay, can fentanyl be absorbed through your skin? Yes, but your skin does an excellent job of protecting you. How you're going to get it really is through your mucous membranes, your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. Okay, that's just how it's going to happen. Okay, and most of it is because of inadequate PPEs. At a minimum, you should be wearing gloves. You should be wearing a P100 mask and some type of eye protection. You don't need to be in a level A suit, okay, but you just need to be aware that, whatever you touch, especially when you're wearing gloves, don't touch your face, don't touch anything else because you're going to get exposed. And then the lack of safety protocols, which varies from department to department. And my caveat to all this is, doesn't matter what Kevin says, doesn't matter what First Line Technology says. You have to follow your agency's or department's policies and procedures. Okay. One, it'll keep you out of trouble if something does go wrong. And, that's real important. If, we give you some ideas today, they're like, hey, maybe I need to go back and talk to the boss about maybe we need to change things up, then good. But always follow your own policies and procedures. Okay. So I just throw this in there. Press conferences are handled every day. Did a lot of research on this. Federal agencies, especially now with the just with the political climate, where there's a focus now on the transnational, the cartels and stuff like that. You're going to be seeing a lot more of these, not just methamphetamine or fentanyl, but also on cocaine and all the other drugs that are coming from there. Okay, so you're going to start seeing a lot more. It's very high profile right now. Okay. So there's just a lot of these things that are going on. It does happen every day. And the more that it happens, the more of the chance you're going to have of somebody getting an accidental exposure. So we call it the money shot dilemma. Okay, what is the money shot? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you look at that picture right there, that's what it is. You have the drug sitting there and you're showing the press and the general public what's going on. And it's a good thing. They need to see that, okay, that this stuff was taken off the street, okay? And, what are the safety risks? Okay, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but there are safety risks. Again, when you're bringing the drugs in to show everybody, when you're done, what are you doing to clean up that area to make sure that it's safe? Okay, because a lot of times these are held in conference rooms, and there's a lot of other things. Those conference rooms are like multi-purpose rooms. One day, you're having a conference, and then 3 hours later at lunchtime, you're having a potluck in there. That's not good. Okay. You can't be doing that. Okay. Um, Again, you want to communicate this stuff to the public, but you have to keep safety in mind. Okay. So again, I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, their knowledge and stuff like that, but there's just some fundamental things we need to talk about fentanyl again, because there's a lot of really bad information out there. And so we're just trying to clarify it just so people understand. Okay. So just so people know, It is extremely potent, and there's many different analogs of fentanyl there's some that are benign, and there's some like carfentanil and some of the other stuff that's coming out and the emerging threats that are so toxic that you can't dilute them down enough to make them safe. Okay. So what it's based on is morphine. Okay, that's basically the toxicity level. Morphine is basically the toxicity is one. When they talk about carfentanil being 50 to 100 times more toxic, well, it's more toxic than morphine. Okay, so that's what they're talking about. Carfentanil, which is for large animals at the zoos like elephants, rhinoceroses, and I always throw in ex-wives and husbands and boyfriends and girlfriends. That's 10,000 times more toxic than than morphine. So that's when you get into, what does this mean? Okay. Again, trace amounts of fentanyl can be toxic. Now, just because you get exposed to fentanyl doesn't necessarily mean you're going to overdose. But what you do remember is if you start to have if you think you were exposed or you were exposed, one, you need to be administered Narcan and you need to go to the hospital. Okay. You need to have them, you need to be monitored, they'll put you on a drip and they're not going to let you go until they know it's out of your system. Because the unique thing about fentanyl is, well, and also Narcan has a very quick onset, but a very short duration. So you could still, depending on the dosage that you got, you could still have fentanyl in your system. The Narcan's going to wear off, and then that fentanyl is going to go back to your opioid receptors, and then you're going to start having symptoms again. So it's really, really important that you actually do get medical attention on that. Okay. So a lot of my information comes from DEA. You know, not that DEA is all knowing and all powerful, but they do have some really good information. And a lot of it comes from drug seizures and the DEA labs that do the testing. And DEA isn't the only agency that submits their drugs to the DEA labs. There's about 6 or 7 other federal agencies that do that. So it's kind of a cross. I would assume that based on what I've seen from other state and local labs, that it's pretty similar to what they're seeing. Okay. But generally speaking, you're going to see the fentanyl that's in either the pill form or the powder form. It just depends. We all know that you're all from different parts of the country, that what happens in Arizona is drastically different than what's happening on the East Coast. We still have a lot of heroin in Arizona, Mexican black tar, and we also have the fake oxys, and we also have street level fentanyl that's mixed in with methamphetamine and everything else. Okay. So, but it's different. I've been fortunate to work all over the country and all over the world. Everywhere you go, it's different. Okay. And one thing I want to take a step back and just remember that a lethal dosage of fentanyl for somebody who is fentanyl naive is about 2 to 2.5 milligrams of fentanyl. Okay. So if you took a package of 1 gram of sugar, that's 1,000 milligrams. If that sugar was 100% pure fentanyl, there'd be almost 400 lethal dosages in that package of sugar. So that's what we're talking about here. Okay. Again, rapid absorption. I'm not too concerned about my skin. What I am is getting it on my skin and then rubbing my face. You're going to get it through your mucous membrane. You're going to get it on your clothing. And when you take your clothing off, you're going to expose yourself. You're going to get it on your clothing. You're going to go home. You're going to pick up your kids. You're going to pet your animals, and you could have a potential exposure for them there. Okay. Biggest concern that I see based on what I know now is aerosolization. All right. That is a huge concern. Okay. And again, moving stuff around and baffling it up in the air, it stays up in the air because of its chemical properties. It can be aerosolized for a very long period of time. So why did fentanyl stay airborne? Again, I'm not a chemist. I know more about this stuff now than I ever did when I was in law enforcement because I have time to look at it now. But basically, the chemical properties of fentanyl, just real quick, are extremely small and they're light particles. Okay. It has a low density and high surface area. What that means is because it's so small and it doesn't weigh a lot, okay, that's a low density. So when it does get aerosolized, it can spread all over and it can stay airborne for a long period of time. And then once it does land, because of those properties, it has a high propensity to be aerosolized again. Okay. The other thing too is it doesn't clump together, okay? It stays apart. So a fentanyl particle is like 0.2 microns, really, really small. You can't see it. And the reason why I put xylazine on here is because xylazine is one of the primary cutting agents and adulterants that's being used now on street level and also being used by the cartels. Okay. So xylazine is a lot heavier. So what happens is if xylazine is being used as the cutting agent or the adulterant, when you mix those two together, generally speaking, if the fentanyl is not wet or whatever, unless there's some electrostatic thing going on there, they're going to stay separated. So if it gets aerosolized, the heavier particles like xylazine are going to fall to the ground quicker, but the fentanyl is still going to remain in the air. Okay, so that's just kind of an explanation of how that works. It just roughly speaking, that the xylazine is like 100,000 times heavier than fentanyl. So that's why that happened. Now, if I have a pile of fentanyl sitting on the table and a pile of methamphetamine, what am I more concerned about? I'm more concerned about the fentanyl because if it gets aerosolized, I got a big problem. Methamphetamine, I'm not that concerned about it. The idea is when you have something like that, you have to minimize that risk or eliminate that risk. So here's some things I want you to think about fentanyl. Again, this isn't something that First Line Technology came up with. All of our data, all of our training, and our products are based on studies that were generally done by some other agency, federal agency, like the Department of Defense, EPA, and other agencies. Okay, so just some things that when because when the military is really concerned about fentanyl being weaponized, and it has been used as a weapon before. I won't get in there, but it was a Russian movie theater back in the early 2000s where the Russian military pumped in fentanyl to basically immobilize some terrorists and it ended up killing like 130 people and also the terrorists. But they do a lot of studies on this and some of our federal law enforcement agencies and our intelligence agencies are really concerned about fentanyl being aerosolized like in over a soccer stadium or a football stadium. It can be a huge problem. Okay. But one of the big issues with fentanyl is that it's very stable. The studies that the military done is that it can be very stable in soils for over 12 months. And, so this is something that's outside. This is something that's being exposed to the elements and things like that. So just something to think about, that it is very stable. Okay. And again, it could be up to months or years and it's still in there. And these are studies that are done not by First Line, but done by the military. Another thing too is that fentanyl is not water soluble. Okay. Meaning that it's very stable in water. So when it comes to decontamination since World War I, for over 100 years, the primary way to decon somebody was with water. Water will remove a lot of threats, but water will not dissipate or destroy fentanyl. It takes an awful lot of water hydrolysis to basically dilute it down to a point to where it's no longer a threat. Okay. So that's just something to think about. If you get something on you get something on a surface and you apply water to it, that may get it off. Most of the time, it's just going to make the problem worse. But if you get water in it, you just have to remember wherever that water goes, whether it's on a rag or it's on the floor, it's on the carpet or whatever, it's still a threat because it's still there. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So what we want to talk now is, what's at stake here. And this is kind of where we get into kind of like the health risk and also some of the criminal and civil liabilities that a department. This is where like the legal counsel and the bosses get involved. Okay. This is why precautions are necessary. Okay. When we do these things, we want to make sure that we're supposed to be the subject matter experts. And I have to apologize when I say I'm retired. It's kind of hard to get my mind out of like, oh, I'm not in law enforcement anymore. So please, I should say you, not me. But it's to protect the safety of the attendees. The last thing you want is for somebody to come in and you're trying to do a good public thing and have transparency, and they get an exposure. Okay. And even your employees, the evidence technicians or the officers or whoever's bringing that evidence in, again, go back to, if it's so dangerous, why are we displaying it? Why are we handling it so many times? Okay. Real important to remember. Um, so, and again, we want to minimize cross-contamination and aerosolization. And I can't emphasize it enough how important that is with fentanyl. It just is. Okay. And again, we want to prevent and minimize potential criminal and civil penalties, because there are some repercussions for this if something like this happens. Okay. Um, and so it's one of those things that a lot of people don't think about, but it could happen, and it only takes one time. All right. One of the things we want to make sure that we do is we have, or you have, some type of emergency steps for exposures. Okay. What does that mean? You got to have Narcan somewhere. Not, I won't mention the agency, but there was an agency that I had did a lot of training for, that the bosses, the first line supervisors, had the Narcan, but it was locked up in their office. That does nobody any good. Okay, by the time the officer got exposed and they found the supervisor, if the supervisor could be found, it was too late. So that's a no-no. You got to have it available. If you're going to be displaying this stuff, you should probably have that stuff available. Okay. First thing you want to do, administer the Narcan 911. Okay, or take them to the hospital. Okay. You want to perform emergency decontamination on that person, because what's going to happen is, if you take somebody to the hospital, you go into the emergency department, first thing, and you tell them, oh, they got exposed to fentanyl. First thing they're going to ask you is, have they been decontaminated? The answer should always be yes, but you need to do some type of decontamination, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in the end. But that's really important. We do a lot of training for hospitals, and they are very much aware of this, because the last thing they want is you bringing somebody into their ED that's contaminated with something, and now they got to shut the ED down. Okay, they're out of the mix. They don't do anybody any good. Okay, and again, I can't emphasize enough about the further cross contamination. I'm gonna beat that into your heads today. It is a problem. Okay, so I'm not an attorney, not trying to scare anybody, but again, when I was doing clan labs, meth labs for DEA, especially in the Phoenix area, there's a lot of issues. When drugs are nothing more than chemicals. Okay, there's not a special category under OSHA or NIOSH or EPA about, oh, if it's drugs, it's this. They are chemicals, and they're called toxic industrial chemicals or materials. That's all they are, and that's how the EPA looks at these things, and OSHA looks at these things. They're just chemicals, and they have to be handled as hazardous materials. Okay, and if you don't follow certain protocols like proper PPEs and decontamination, remediation, and removal or destruction, there's huge civil fines for it. And the federal agencies are not exempt from that. Neither are state and local agencies. So if you have an incident at your department during a press conference and somebody gets exposed, it's quite possible you may get a visit by the EPA, and they're going to come in, and it's going to be a huge problem. Then they're going to come through, and they're going to demand that you do testing of that conference room. They're going to do their own testing. And if they find residual amounts of certain levels of drugs in there, there's going to be a problem. And it never goes away. Okay. We were, cross my fingers and my heart and, pray that never happened, but I was always conscious of that, man. We got to make sure that we do this right. Okay. So, something to think about. Civil liabilities, these are the agencies. DEA can get involved. OSHA and EPA. OSHA is a big thing. Not so much with the hazardous chemicals, but if you have a unsafe work environment, somebody files a complaint with OSHA, that's the other big issue. Okay, it just is. And so these are things we want to concern about. It's better to get ahead of the situation, take precautions, because ignorance of the law or ignorance and ignoring it isn't a defense. It just isn't. And plus, I don't want anybody to get hurt. You don't want anybody to get hurt. I feel really bad about that. And so these are things that people need to be concerned about. You need to think about it. After it happens, it's too late. Okay. So just something to think about. Again, if you're interested, I'm not going to read this. If you want to scan that QR code or take a picture of this, you can go to this and you can, scan the QR code or copy down or just take a picture and you can go to that link right there. It explains this more about some of the issues that you could come across that you need to deal with. Again, this is for bosses and this is for the legal counsel to take a look at this stuff. The last thing we want is the knee-jerk reaction that if something like this happens and everybody says, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. Okay. Because that's generally what happens is when these things occur. They want it's risk management. Oh, we don't want to do this anymore. Look what happened. We're going to get sued. No, we want to continue to do what you're doing. You want to be able to have that transparency and show it to the general public because you're out there doing good work. You're doing hard work. This is not easy. You're risking your life to make everybody else's life better and safer. And the public needs to know that. But the last thing you want is say, no, we're not doing this anymore, because then nobody knows the good work that you're doing. So if you haven't already done so, go ahead and do so. And also too, if I will tell you at the end, you have our contact information, any data about any of this stuff that we can share with you, we're more than happy to do so. So there are states out there that they have remediation laws, and remediation is different than decon, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But if you have an exposure, you have something where you have an incident, okay, and you have to go in and not just do decon, but you have to bring somebody in to do remediation, okay? California is a big one. Most people kind of follow California, but there's, I think there's like close to 30 different states that have remediation laws. Like if there's an exposure, like back in the day when everybody was doing meth labs, or now there's a drug house, the people who go in and do the remediation, they go in and do the remediation and they have to do testing. Testing has to be sent to an analytical lab, a certified lab, and it has to be below a certain level before it's considered safe. That's not just private. And also, involves state and local agencies, businesses, and things like that, okay? In order for that place to be reoccupied, it has to meet that certain level, okay? Law enforcement's not exempt from that. So it's just something to think about, okay? Again, unfortunately, California, their fentanyl law mirrors their methamphetamine law. We're talking about two different drugs right here, and one of them is not as potent as the other one. So it's really kind of one of those feel-good laws. It's good that they have one, but it's a feel-good law that the drugs are different, and it doesn't make any sense. Arizona, where I live, we used to have a law where if you were the property owner, whether it was personal, residential, commercial, or whatever, that before it could be reoccupied, it had to be remediated. And there was civil and criminal fines for that. They got away with that about 10 years ago. The real estate lobby came into the legislature and said, we don't want to do that anymore. So there isn't one here anymore. Okay. But a lot of states there are. So I'm going to talk now about decontamination. And again, I'm not a salesperson. I am a trainer. I am a technical specialist. But decon, and there's good decon and there's bad decon. And there's a lot in between. Okay. And decontamination of just personnel and also property is very, very important. Okay. And so we want to kind of go over why it's important, what you should do, and some of the things you should consider when you're doing decon. And again, I hope anybody, if they have any questions now, if they have any questions later, please let me know, and we'll go from there. But I want to talk about decon. And so there is a difference. Decontamination, this is kind of the Webster's Wikipedia definition for it right here. And it's the process of removing or neutralizing hazardous substances, okay? Chemical, biological threats, radioactive materials from people, equipment, or environments to make them safe. And I want you to focus on making them safe because it's decon, especially emergency decon for somebody who got exposed right away, it's not 100%. It's getting something to a level that's safe, okay? So, but there is a difference between decontamination and remediation. And from a law enforcement standpoint, we don't really, or you don't really get into the remediation process. You're doing the decontamination process. However, if your evidence room or one of your vehicles, or if your conference room where you're having these press conferences, whatever it is that you're doing this, if you have a contamination, you have to decon and you have to maybe consider remediation. Okay. Again, fentanyl is extremely fine particle. It can be permeate itself on very porous surfaces, carpets, curtains, things like that. You know, any type of material. And it can, and as we mentioned, water soluble, it's extremely stable for long periods of time. It's probably still there. You need to think about it. The bosses don't like to hear that. Oh God, what is that going to cost me? It's like, it'll be fine. You know, it's not a problem until it's a problem. Well, it is a problem. And again, it takes that one person where things can go south pretty quick. And then, you know, we have all kinds of policy changes at that point. So remediation basically is a cleanup process. That's what it is. And again, depending on where you live and what state, you have to get it down to a safe level. And what is that safe level? And that just depends. Destruction, totally different. That's when you take that hazardous materials after it's been deconned or remediated and it gets destroyed. Sometimes that's done through chemicals. Most of the time it's incineration. That's how most of the drugs that are seized, they get incinerated. And there's some other processes now that people are going through, but generally speaking, most of the drugs, you know, I wish I had $1 for every time I had to go on a drug burn with DEA. It has to be done all the time. So again, this isn't a decon class, this isn't a chemical class, but basically contaminations or contaminants are divided into two separate things. They're persistent and non-persistent. All right. A lot of your chemical biological warfare, especially your chemical warfare stuff that hopefully you never come across, are very persistent. Like pesticides are very persistent. A lot of the chemicals used to make synthetic drugs are persistent. Some of them aren't. A lot of your solvents, your acetones and things like that, naphtha, if you pour it on the sidewalk, it evaporates pretty quick. That's a non-persistent chemical. But some of the chemicals out there, some of the precursor chemicals, some of the byproducts of people who are manufacturing drugs, those are persistent. And I bring that up because, you know, there's nowhere near the amount of synthetic drug labs. And I try to get away from the word clan lab because clan lab has a general meaning of methamphetamine. Okay. You know, even the DEA clan lab unit changed their name to something different. So I'm trying to get away, I call it synthetic drug labs. There's still not a lot of them in the US, but what I think is going to happen, and you're starting to see this now is, and this has to do with what's going on at the border, that you're going to start seeing a lot of conversion labs. Basically, the chemicals are going to be coming into the US already pre-mixed, but they're going to be in liquid form. They do that one to hide it, but it's just easier to transport. And they're going someplace where it's been converted from a liquid back to a solid. You'll see a lot of this with methamphetamine. And again, I don't know where everybody's from, but a lot of like in Atlanta, there's a lot of meth conversion labs. These are just nothing more than chemicals. A lot of those chemicals are persistent, some of them aren't. But persistent chemicals like fentanyl, as we discussed, water soluble, it's not water soluble, it's persistent, and it can stay airborne for long periods of time. That's a persistent chemical substance. It just is. So that's how we classify it. Stays for a long time. Again, water, things like that, it's not going to get rid of it. So I talked earlier about decon, and sometimes the decon that you do is 100% effective. Generally speaking, it's not. what the goal is to get it down to a safe level. Okay. Again, it's not always 100%, and there's reasons why. Again, depends on the surface. Is the surface solid? Is it porous? The microscopic particles like fentanyl, chemical limitations that you have, and environmental factors. What's the temperature? What's the humidity? Is it wet? Is it going to stick? Is it clumping together? There's all kinds of factors that go into that. Okay. The goal here is safety. Okay. Not necessarily perfection. Now, this again kind of applies to emergency decon. If you're doing something, you're doing a press conference, and somebody, whether it's a personnel, an employee, or it's somebody in the general public or the press, they get exposed to something. What we're going to do right there, that is called basically emergency decon. And kind of your go-to for that is dry decon. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But dry decon is your go-to, okay? First thing you do, and people don't like to do this, you got to get them out of their clothing, because that's the first thing paramedics do when they show up, right? You go to the hospital, they're going to get you out of your clothing. Studies have shown, this just isn't Kevin or First Line saying that removing clothing removes about 95% of the contamination. So you're left with 5%. Can that 5% still be dangerous or toxic? Absolutely. But you're getting rid of the bulk of it right there. And you're also minimizing cross-contamination and aerosolization, okay? Again, goal safety, not necessarily perfection, okay? There's this acronym out there. We didn't come up with it. It came from a lot of 3 and 4 letter agencies out there. It's called ALARA, and it basically stands for as low as reasonably achievable when it comes to decon. Okay, so we're getting it down to a level that substance may still be there, but it's not dangerous anymore. Okay, so that's something to think about. Again, if you're going to take somebody to the hospital or something like that, did I get it down to a level that's safe? That's what we're looking for. How do you know? That all depends on the chemical and the substance, okay? But that's just something to think about. So it's really, and if you don't have any questions or anything like that, the need for law enforcement to follow best practices, okay? I kind of like talked about that, but it's basically for safety. It really is. 100%. Again, not just for you, but also for the people that are getting exposed to this. Again, you all are supposed to be the subject matter experts on this. You want to make sure that you handle these things appropriately. So how do we select the best and correct decon solutions and methods? Okay. Is it what's on the GSA schedule? Is it whatever somebody uses at home, which is probably not a good idea, and I'm going to explain why. Is it something that somebody has a buddy who has their own cleanup business and they're going to use them? You need to take whoever makes these decisions, and it may not be you, they need to be aware of this, okay? Again, I go back to some of the substances that you're dealing with are persistent. And sometimes using chemicals and water to try to mitigate or remove something takes a situation and makes it worse, okay? So just something to think about. So in our world, there's a lot of stuff out there. We call it snake oil. People say, oh, we've got something that'll destroy fentanyl, or we got something that'll destroy xylazine or whatever. And we always ask for, let me see the data on that. And if anybody, and I say this because, if you wanted to see the data on the stuff that we use, we're going to show it to you. And it's not just it's not just stuff that we came up with. Yeah, we do our own testing, but we rely heavily on independent testing, especially by the DOD and some of these other agencies. Okay, so we are constantly, we are a for-profit business. And again, I'm not a salesperson, but if one of you came up with a better decon solution tomorrow, we would come to you, try to license that and sell it for you, because we're always looking for what's best out there. So this is the things that we use and the methods that we use are based on things that other people have done. And we find that based on the studies, that these have the highest efficacy of anything out there. So I focus on the EPA study. And so there is a substance that we use, that we have, we produce, we sell it, and we train on it. It's called Dahlgren Decon. Dahlgren was designed by the Navy Surface Warfare branch, it's called Dahlgren Decon. It's called Dahlgren. That's where it was developed. The Navy needed something for mass decon of an aircraft carrier, of aircraft, things like that. They needed something that was easy to use, didn't require water, environmentally safe, and most importantly, didn't destroy a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier. So they came up with this like very, very effective soap. And it's like 30,000 times more efficient than Dawn soap, which is a really good commercial soap, especially for getting rid of petroleum contamination. But it also has a couple other components in it. It has peracetic acid and borate. Peracetic acid, and I'm going to really talk a lot about this, is found to be most effective as a decontamination solution on a wide variety of chemical biological threats, and especially fentanyl. Okay. And I'll say this right up front. Dahlgren Decon will chemically change fentanyl to make it safe in less than 2 minutes. It's very easy. If you can mix chocolate milk, you can mix this stuff. But this is how effective this stuff is. Okay, it's effective on your PPEs. You can get it on your sensitive equipment, your weapon systems, whatever it is that you're using out there. It's not going to hurt it. Okay. It's environmentally safe too. When you're done, if you have anything left, you can dump it down the drain. Studies showed, because most people now use bleach. They think that bleach is the best product out there. It's cheap, it's readily available. They think that by using bleach, that bleach is going to destroy whatever the threat is, especially fentanyl. However, what we do know is that bleach actually makes fentanyl harder to destroy. And it's not just us saying it. There's studies out there that shows why. Basically clumps it, turns it back into a base. Now it makes her harder to destroy. Okay. So again, Dahlgren was designed to go after the really nasty stuff like VX, sarin, and other chemical biological threats. VX kind of being the bar. If it can destroy, something can destroy or neutralize VX in 15 minutes. That's what the goal was. And Dahlgren did that. It's just coincidentally, several years ago, DEA came to our company and said, will Dahlgren work on fentanyl? We did the testing and found out that it does chemically change it to make it safe. And if you notice, I'm not saying it destroys it. There are some people that say, well, it doesn't destroy fentanyl, and that's correct. It doesn't. It changes it into an analog that's safe, that's benign. Okay, and I'll talk about that more in a second. All right. So again, this is stuff, if you want it, if you're trying to like, hey, I want to take a look at this stuff. Again, I'm not a salesperson. We have people who do that. But these are the studies that are out there that show that, again, how this stuff works and its efficacy. All right. I guess my point is that you have to decon something and you have to do some remediation. You need to be very, very selective and careful about what you're using. Water's not going to work on fentanyl. Bleach is going to make it worse. 409 and all that other stuff. All you're really doing is one, you're making it harder to destroy, and you're basically getting more cross contamination. You're just smearing it all over. You just are. You're not making it safe. And this is some of the studies that the EPA did, and they said why peracetic acid, which is the basis of Dahlgren, why it matters. pH, problem with hydrogen. It's when Dahlgren is finally mixed and it's ready to go, it goes to a chemical process. It's pH neutral. Okay, that's why it doesn't destroy things. But what they have found is because of the pH. Again, I'm not a chemistry major. I'm a dummy. I took college chemistry and biology for idiots because that just wasn't me. I wanted to be a cop. Not the cops are idiots, but I wasn't interested in that. This is what they found. And if you kind of take a look again, you take standard scale, you have fentanyl remediation. On the left-hand side, water, after they did their study, by using water, there was still a lot of fentanyl left over. OxyClean, you know, which is basically, over-the-counter hydrogen peroxide. A lot of fentanyl left over. There was a lot of really bad information that came out a few years ago by the Attorney General's office in Ohio that said that OxyClean will destroy fentanyl. Nah, it doesn't destroy fentanyl. It makes it harder to destroy. It doesn't get rid of it. Bleach with the pH 7. Again, a lot of fentanyl left over. When you start to lower the pH, bleach with pH, at about 5, there was still fentanyl there, but it wasn't bad. End result is all the studies that they did and the chemicals that they found that Dahlgren had the highest efficacy, almost 100%. Nothing's 100%, but it was like 99%. So I kind of go back to what we're talking about before. If you remove somebody from their clothing in decon, you remove 95% of the contamination. Now you're only dealing with 5%. So if you have something that is going to be able to decon, a surface or something like that, and you've already removed 95% of it, even dry decon is going to remove 95% of what's left. Okay. So something to think about. Again, I've talked about it, why bleach doesn't work. Okay. Doesn't neutralize the fentanyl molecules. It leaves residual contamination, and it can create harmful byproducts. But also too, it can also destroy or degrade whatever the sensitive equipment and stuff like that is that you're trying to decon. Okay. Again, peracetic acid chemically neutralizes fentanyl, changes it, has almost 100% efficacy rate, works in somewhere around 5 minutes, depending on the threat. Okay, VX being 15 minutes, but most of your dangerous drugs out there, cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, whether it's in powder form or it's in liquid form, it will neutralize, destroy, or chemically change it to make it safe in less than 5 minutes. Okay, very easy to use. It has a 10-year shelf life, so very, very easy. How does peracetic acid neutralize fentanyl? And just real quick, what it does, and I'm not going to get into the chemistry of it, what peracetic acid does, and again, this is a study that came from the Department of Defense, the Army, again, because they're concerned about it being used in the battlefield. And the interesting thing is, I'm sure there's folks out here, I see some people and stuff like that are in the military. I always ask this question. What's more important to the military, an M1 Abrams tank or a specialist? They can replace personnel really quick. They're more concerned about if a tank or some type of piece of equipment gets contaminated, how quick can I get that back into service? Okay, that's how they look at it, right? So what they found in their studies as a byproduct of that, what a peracetic acid borate concentration like Dahlgren does, it changes fentanyl from an analog from fentanyl hydrochloride, HCl, to fentanyl in oxide. So it's still a fentanyl. Okay, so if you hear somebody say, well, it doesn't destroy fentanyl, that is correct. But fentanyl in oxide is not toxic, excuse me. How do we know that? So when we got that study, we submitted that study to DEA, Office of Diversion Control. And again, I go back to my contacts with DEA. DEA sent us back a letter. We sent them the information. They sent us back a letter. They told us that fentanyl in oxide is not a controlled substance. Therefore, it's not a threat. Okay. So there you go. We have this letter. I'm more than happy to share this letter with anybody if you need it but this is a substance that works on a broad spectrum of threats, not just fentanyl. There's other threats out there too. It does work on cocaine. It does work on methamphetamine, heroin, all your synthetic opioids, semi-synthetics, prescription, over-the-counter, and stuff like that. It is effective on them. Okay, but we have this letter. More than happy to share it. So we're really happy about that. Okay. The big thing right here is that we look at what are the key issues here. And you have the press conference, everybody's happy. Most of the time, the officers who did the case, they're still processing prisoners and they're dealing with paperwork and stuff like that. But the big thing you have to worry about is it's kind of a false sense of safety. Okay. We got everything out of there. We wiped it off with 409. Is it safe? The reality of it is probably not. Okay. These are things you want to think about. Again, what's going to happen in that conference room today or tomorrow or something like that? You can have a Christmas party or whatever. Can it happen? Absolutely. There's all kinds of documented cases in the US about where somebody's been in a hotel room. Okay. They've been in there either using drugs or fentanyl, or they've been street level dealers that are mixing it with an adulterant. And when the cleaning people come in, they do their thing. But then somebody comes in after those other people and they rent that room or whatever, and they have a child that's playing around on the carpet and they get exposed to something and they find out they got exposed to fentanyl and they think these parents are horrible parents, and they realize that, oh, a couple of days ago there was these guys in here that were dealing drugs and it was fentanyl. It's still there. Okay, that's the point. So this is the point. This is my point that I'm trying to make right here, is that when you do these things, you got to do it, but you got to take the steps afterwards to make sure that you clean it up, because this happens all the time. I remember, I'm not going to say where it was, but we seized 1,000 kilograms of cocaine. We processed it in the conference room because we didn't have a warehouse at the time. We didn't do any cleaning after that. And again, like I said, I had a Christmas party 3 days later or something like that. It was like, I look back on that now, it's like, oh, that was probably a bad idea, right? But it does happen. How many people test drugs in the front seat of their car when you're out on the street? Or you do it at your desk, right? You don't do it where you're supposed to do it in the evidence processing area with a vented hood and stuff like that. Okay? So safety protocols. Again, something to think about. You have to, talk to your managers about this. You have to get things in place beforehand, because after it happens, it's too late. But you just want to make sure you have the people who are handling this stuff that are in close proximity wearing the proper PPEs. Again, you don't have to put on a level A suit. You don't have to put on a modified B. Just have protection in your hands, your eyes, and your nose and your mouth. Okay? Don't let the media touch it. Have a safe zone, like you can take pictures of it or whatever. Most importantly is when you're done, you want to make sure that you take the proper precautions to make sure that you decon that to a safe level. Okay. The big thing is too, when we talk about fentanyl, is the aerosolization, and it gets into the HVAC system and it can spread through the entire office. That can happen. Okay. Again, documented cases in houses and other commercial places where this stuff is going. Okay. And so just something to think about. Environmental controls, emergency responses. We talked a lot about that. Most of you know what you need to do, but it needs to be available. Okay. Especially if you're talking about, I can't believe that, and maybe it's happened, and I hope we have some PIOs here who can shed some light on this, where you're actually doing a conference and you have a reporter who, raises their hand and go, well, if it's so dangerous, why is it sitting here? Now you can go back and go, because we take precautions. We're wearing PPEs. We have a way to, we're going to come in afterwards. We're going to do some trace detection, and we're going to decon it, okay, out of safety. Things to think about. Because you don't want to be standing there going, oh, gee, Tennessee, I don't know. You don't want to be doing that, okay? Cleanup and disposal. Again, safe removal of contaminants. You want to make sure you have the right product. If you find something better than what I've talked about, I'm going to just mention real quick here, God bless you. Let us know about it, because we want to see it. But just, again, be cautious about what you're using. You're making something worse, okay? Waste management protocols, again, policies and procedures of every department is different. But just air monitoring, a lot of departments have some really, really good devices out there, and you want to use them. Again, we're talking trace detection. So a lot of the devices out there aren't trace, they're bulk. But there are some really good, really inexpensive, like fentanyl test strips and stuff out there. They're really inexpensive, like a couple dollars each. These are things you need to think about. That way you can go in because you know what's going to happen. There's going to be an incident and everybody's going to look down at like, well, who, you should have done this, this, and this. Well, yeah, we did. We went in, we deconned it. We did use these trace detection test strips. We didn't find anything. We thought it was safe. You're minimizing the risk. So we have this concept, we call it hybrid decon. Okay, again, I talked earlier about most decon since World War I has been water, lots and lots and lots of water. And what they have found over the years is it really wasn't that effective. Okay. And so I apologize in the background. My husky is being too vocal. She has a lot to say. So water gets some contamination off of you, but sometimes water makes it worse. And a lot of it is not water soluble, so it's very persistent. So what is hybrid decon? Hybrid decon is both what we call dry decon. Dry decon is taking some type of an effective wipe and you're removing the contamination. And studies have shown certain types of wipes work better than others, removing almost 100% of the contaminant. And I'll talk about that in a second, okay? But hybrid decon is using dry decon, which should always be your go-to, but it also is using some type of chemical, wet decon, other than water, to neutralize, chemically change, or destroy the threat, okay? So I talked about, we have two different products. They were both developed, again, Dahlgren was developed by the military. FiberTech wipes, and again, we have studies on these about the effectiveness of them. This was developed by Texas Tech University with the DoD grant. These are polyester wipes. They have activated carbon in the middle. They are very effective at a broad range of different types of contaminants for dry decon. Again, they can remove up to 95% of a contamination. So when I talked earlier about people's clothing, okay, the clothing on them, you get the clothing off of them, you remove 95% of the threat. You take one of these one of these FiberTech wipes and you decon them with the wipe, especially before if you have to take somebody to the ED, you removed 95% of what's left. So have you got them down to a level that's reasonably achievable? I would say, yeah. They don't destroy that. The FiberTech doesn't destroy it. It does remove the Dahlgren. That's what does the actual neutralization or destruction. Okay. Again, these are the products that we produce, that we sell, because the studies have shown they are the best. And this is what they work on: chemical warfare agents, really nasty stuff, biologicals, toxic industrial chemicals, which a lot of the drugs that are made, they're using all kinds of different chemicals. Some of them not pharmaceutical, a lot of them just stuff you can go to the methamphetamine section of Home Depot or Walmart and buy this stuff, right? Pesticides. Pesticides are extremely, matter of fact, they use pesticides as simulants for chemical biological threats because they're so persistent. They are. And then synthetic opioids and emerging threats. This stuff works on xylazine and a lot of the other nitazines and some of the other things that are being used right now by the cartels and other people. FiberTech, very effective on chemical weapons, biologicals, toxic industrial chemicals, and particulates. Okay. So again, these are very effective, very effective. FiberTech, again, PPEs, you can use it on your skin, your sensitive equipment, other equipment. Works very well. So I mentioned this earlier. I'm guilty of it. Again, I know I'm not, I try not to lecture because I'm guilty of being involved in these type of things. Yeah, that was me when I had hair and I was much younger and working with my fellow agents and state and local counterparts. We did it all the time. Did we clean up that stuff when we were done? Absolutely not. We should have. It's negligence on our part, but call it negligence and ignorance. What I know now, we're just trying to pass on to everybody else. Did we get lucky? Yeah, we always say that in law enforcement. We think it's our skills, our tactics and stuff like that. That's part of it. Most of it's luck. Okay. Just is. All right. I'm kind of getting to the end here, but so we have this Decon Field Guide. It's a free app. You won't get advertisements from me. We don't collect your information and sell it. If you're interested, you can scan, depending on your phone. If you got an Android or you got an you can go ahead and scan that QR code and download it to your phone. Basically, the app works, it has a threat index. If you come across something, you can enter in that index, that threat, and it'll tell you what type of decon you should use. Should you use dry decon? Should you use Dahlgren? If you buy into the, if you shouldn't say buy, if you're using our system, this works really well on it. It's really a great app. Um, Even if you'd gone through our training or you knew how to use this stuff, if you're already a customer and you haven't done this, or a user of Dahlgren, it's got videos, it's got all kinds of stuff. It's really, really effective. If you want to use it, if you want to get it, please go ahead, scan it. I encourage you to use your work email address so we can vet it and we'll prove it probably next 24 hours. Okay. So what's really nice too is it saves it to your phone or whatever device it is that you're using. So if you're out someplace and you don't have internet or cell phone service, then um, then it's saved to your phone. So then when you get back in there, if we've had any updates, and by the way, yeah, we have been updating this, especially with a lot of the drug threats. We just recently added like over 30 uh, precursor chemicals, cutting agents, and byproducts that the cartels are using to make fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin. We're constantly adding uh, new threats to it. If you're out there and you're coming across something that isn't in there, but you're seeing it all the time, let us know. We'll put it in there if tell you if it's something that this stuff will work on or whatever. We'll tell you. We'll put it in there. That way it's had it. But you know, we do it all the time. Within probably the last 6 months, we've put almost 100 new threats in there. All right. So I don't have anything more. I hope this was informational. Just real quick, my information is right there. You can take a picture of it. My boss at the top right there, Corey Collins, he's our director of research, development, and training. Corey is like a really, really smart guy. Like he can cite all these studies and chemicals and stuff off the top of his head. He was a former combat engineer in the National Guard, and he was a police officer or sheriff's deputy. Really, really good guy. Frank Roberts is probably our lead trainer. Best way to describe Frankie. He was in the Marine Corps in Seaburg, did a lot of chemical biological stuff. He's extremely smart. The point here is that if you're out there and you have any questions about threats, how to decon it, whatever, if you call us, you email us, we will respond to you very quickly, usually within a couple hours, if not immediately, to try to get you an answer. Okay. So that's pretty much it. I don't have any more. I'm here for as long as you need to be, answer questions, whatever it is that you need. I know I saw some pop-ups here about people have questions. Maybe they want to get a copy of the letter, stuff like that. We're keeping track of that. We'll make sure that we get it to you, but we're here for you. If you have any questions, whatever, please let us know. We appreciate your input. And you make us better. So thank you very much for being here today. And we're here for questions. So go right ahead.
Hey, Kevin, you got a couple in the chat.
Sure. So we got Michael Loesch wants a copy of the letter. If you provide us your email address, if we don't already have it, I'll send that to you right away. Okay, it's no big deal. Yeah, we have that letter. We like to share it. Also, we have Ulysses Gasper will send you the letter. So we have a question here about Dahlgren being safe for skin. So you're all still there. So right now, Dahlgren, the full strength Dahlgren, the part A comes in three parts. There's part A, B1, and B2. Part A is the surfactant, the soap. Part A, the soap, again, it's like 30,000 times better than anything out there. That is skin safe and it is FDA approved for skin. Once you mix the other two products, B1 and B2, B1 is sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide, we have to add that to it because it's a catalyst. It starts a chemical process that when we add in B2, which is the peracetic acid borate, which actually does the actual chemical neutralization. Once those are added in there, we are not FDA approved yet for skin. Okay. If you get it on your skin, it's not going to kill you. You just wash it off. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to burn you. But we can't advertise. We can't sell it as skin safe in the full mixture. Okay. So, but part A is. See some of the things here. Too much presentation. So the question here is, and I'll read it. It's again, thank you very much for the presentation. It is a complex topic. Will there soon be specific decontaminant for these synthetic chemicals, or would the best approach be general decontaminant that doesn't guarantee 100% effectiveness but works on everything? Good question. There's no such thing as something that works on everything because chemicals are so different. Right now, again, it's a broad spectrum. Some things it works on, some things it doesn't. That's why we have the decon field guide. A lot of times, if Dahlgren does not work on a specific threat, dry decon is your go-to. If you don't know what the threat is, or Dahlgren or some other type of chemical doesn't work on it, you want to use dry decon. Okay, so dry decon should always be your go-to, especially if it's an unknown threat. We do not recommend people using Dahlgren for an unknown threat. If you know what that threat is, you go to the field guide and it's in there and it says it'll tell you what to do. If you come across a threat, you're on scene for something and you come across a threat and it's not in the field guide, you contact us right away and we will tell you yes or no, because not everything in there or not every chemical we have tested. Chemicals fall into certain categories, just like synthetic drugs do. And because we've already done testing on certain chemical categories and threats, we can tell by looking at that whether it'll work or not. Okay, if that makes sense. So there is not one chemical out there right now. If somebody comes up with one, then we're certainly going to take a hard look at it. But right now, based on all the studies out there, and not just the studies, but actually what's going on in real life with all the end users, that this is the best product, generically speaking, for everything out there. So I hope that answers your question. I hope I didn't miss anybody's question, but that's pretty much it. And again, folks who want the letter and have their email address, we will get that to you today. And I thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions about anything, please email us or call us and we'll try to help you out. Okay?